Let me quickly go through some of my favorite Ableton Live effects. I won't have time to do a comprehensive look of everything and how I use it, but just to let you know about some of the stuff that I consider pretty useful. Amp is great for guitar amp type distortion. It's kind of heavy and aggressive. Auto filter is something I use if I have to filter stuff, like if I want to make something more muffled, if I want to take out high frequencies, auto filter is great for that. Also, you have these analog modeled filters which can give you some pretty nice distortion. For example, where's my beat? Let me try this real quickly on Amen, and let me just use the drive. I use this because in my music I like this analog style crunch. So let's try this drive of this filter type, which is a model of a Korg MS-20. So that's definitely pretty sweet. It's also pretty good for bass. Where's my bass? I forgot my bass. That is why I should be naming my tracks. I usually actually color all my bass tracks red, so this way you can color it real quick. Let me try this drive. I would turn this down, of course, so I could turn the track level down here, or I could use utility, which I use a lot for gaining. You can also put these two into a rack. I will actually explain this a bit later, but this way I could activate and disable these two at the same time. So if I crank up the gain, it gets really loud. I take the level down with utility, and I'm trying to find a level so the level doesn't change when this is activated, even though I'm getting more distortion. So okay, but more about audio effects racks later. Auto pan, let me put it on my break track, the drum track. You hear how the sound is going real quick from left to right, so it's panning, and here is the rate, and there are some other controls as well, but I will not go into it in detail. Beat repeat gives you it repeats your audio signal in certain intervals, and the controls for that are there. I use chorus for widening. If you're listening to this with your headphones or a good stereo system, you hear that it's getting wider, because the Amen break is mono, it's not wide, but I use chorus for making it wider. Compressor is a nice all-round compressor. I will not go into compression here. If you're familiar with compression, this is a good tool, and if you're not familiar with compression, I encourage you to look it up. I use drum bus for distortion as well, and drive is this can get pretty crazy. And crunch is more for mids, and drive is like an overall distortion. And the transient control here is nice. Listen to what it does. Especially when you go fully counterclockwise, what it does is it sort of takes out the stuff that is between transients. Transients are the quick events in audio, such as drum hits, like when the level rises real quick. So it keeps those. And the other way, it pretty much it brings out the things, or the level, the audio between transients. So that's a nice tool. And boom is, let's listen to what it does. So basically it generates low frequencies around the frequency that you select here. and this is basically how much, and decay gives it some tail if you want. So that is a nice tool for sure. I love it. Echo. Echo is a delay device. Delay multiplies the signal and in certain rhythmic intervals. And this also has a super nice noise generator. For your filthy analog delay needs, that's great. And one of the plugins that I probably use the most is EQ8. EQ8 is an EQ, as the name says. What an EQ does is it usually boosts or cuts frequencies. And the ways that it's done is often it's done with these so-called bell shapes. You'll hear how the sound gets brighter. Or you have these shelf shapes which look like this. Low shelf, so the signal rises over there, as you can see. High shelf, let me disable that. So high shelf works in a similar manner. And what's great about this is you have you can choose between the operating modes. Stereo, if I'm EQing the sound in stereo mode, it means that it will EQ as you know, the sound has a mono and a stereo signal. They're two different parts in a way. So it's mid is the mono and side is the stereo. So you can also, I often use the mid and side mode, which means that when I click the edit button, I'm now EQing only the mid, the mono part. So if I wanted to make only the stereo part of this brighter, I will add EQing only to the stereo, the side mode. I could do like a high shelf. So you can probably hear that now the changes only apply to the stereo part. And this is nice in my mixing work. I love it. EQ3 is a very simple version of an EQ. It's like a DJ version in a way. Like you have 3 knobs for low, mids, and highs. And Glue Compressor is another compressor modeled after an SSL comp. So I use multiband dynamics a lot. I will be talking about the use of this in my advanced video because I use this a lot for different things. But that's advanced. Basically, you get to touch 3 different frequency bands and do all kinds of stuff with that. It's very useful. Then we already took a look at reverb, but yeah, I like this guy a lot. Creates space, even a long space if you want. Saturator, I use it to distort things. It brings a nice rich body to some sounds when you crank up the drive. You can get more specific with the drive, the distortion down here if you want to. Whoa. You can get crazy with it. It's super amazing with bass. I use it on every bass line these days pretty much. The Spectrum is great as well. Well, you can use it on any track if you want to, so you can get to see the frequency content of your signal. So in that respect, it's a super nice tool. So that's for the effects that I use the most. And there's so many things you can do with these effects. You can open the view and also see and get different presets. Even for reverb, you just open up and there's so many different reverbs you can try out. So definitely experiment and get familiar with the effects because it's a lot of fun. Then as we are speaking about effects, it's good to be aware of these tracks next to your master track here. And these are your return tracks that are usually used for effects. And why would I use these tracks for effects instead of always adding effects on tracks? Well, let's say you have a reverb here, you can send signal of every track to it if you want, and technically you're still using one instance of reverb, so your computer CPU, it's way lighter. Well, let me show you, because even if let's start with the drum loop. I will send this signal of the drum loop with the A knob to the A return track. So listen. Let me make the reverb longer so you can hear. Okay, so it's massive now. So I'm sending the signal of this drum loop to this effect track. And what do I got here? I could send these to the same reverb as well. It's long. I know it's getting messy, but you get my point. One, a return track, or as many as you want, but then you can send every track in your song to this whatever effect. And it's mixing wise, it's nice to sometimes have all the or most of the sounds play in the same space. Like, let me actually make this sorter again so it kind of makes more sense. I can even solo the reverb and listen to it, or whatever effect I could have here. You can have many of these. I have echo here, so if I wanted to send some of the drum loop to the echo, let's listen. Let me solo this. And whatever track could go to the same effect. And you can add these. Just insert return track, and you will see that each track now gets a new knob, because before this I only had A and B. I added one more return track, which is now empty, and I got another knob for C. So this will send signal to C. By the way, I can also disable this. So when I disable it, it's not really, it doesn't pull it down, but it's not doing anything. Return tracks are pretty awesome because it means you don't always have to insert a new effect on every track. They're a very efficient mixing technique. And another thing relating to using effects on a track is how easy it is to save these clips and with all the processing after them. What do I mean by this? Let me load once again. Let me load a reverb on this track and make it long, and maybe let me get a redux. This is a signal degrader. If I wanted to put these in one rack, I select them all and hit group, and now I can just flick it on and off. And one more, maybe echo. I just want to get crazy. Let me show you how you can save this clip and recall it, and also recall all the effects on the track. Yeah, I could give this a name. Let's call it Good Synth. On my user library, there is a clips folder. Here, I could drag this clip, and it'll ask for a name. Good Synth will do. Now, even if I deleted this track, let me show you. And I'll create a new track. If I drag this clip onto the track, you see that now it's the same content. Because when you're saving a clip like that, it will remember all the data, whether it's audio or MIDI, all the notes that could be in a MIDI clip, and it will also remember all the processing that's after it. By the way, these don't have to be inside a rack for live to remember them. So for sound design, this is amazing. You can even preview the clip from the library, just like this. So it means sound designing and saving your sounds, even with all the effects and processing on the track, It's very easy to save, and it's very easy to preview and recall to your project. So you don't have to save a project or a song when you come up with a great sound. Just save it under user library and clips, and you can always get it there, and you can always preview the clips here. Just like that. And if you like it, you can bring it to your project, to your song. Okay, so I just went through some of my favorite audio effects. There are more effects that I went through, so I do encourage you to look them up and just have some fun and experiment. But let's also quickly check out some of the MIDI effects. Let me, just for a change, let me load on a new MIDI track. I created a new MIDI track, and let's load Wavetable for a change. This is an amazing synth with some pretty nice capabilities. For this track, I want to load a MIDI effect. By the way, let's just listen to the synth first. Well, that's a sine wave. If I load a chord, it means that the chord will add some notes to the playback. Let me get a major chord. So without major chord, it sounds like I'm just playing C, one note, C note. And with the MIDI effect, so major chord will play two notes on top of the one note that you play. Transpose values are shown here. What else? You could just experiment with these different chords, and I'm still playing just one note. So this sounds like this, and major chord is like that. And you can just transpose these up as you wish. For example, let me try and do from scratch something that could sound, I don't know, let's see, I'll just try. Yeah, it could work. Also, let's take a look at, let me disable these. Let me get a scale. So scale by default does nothing. Let me play some notes and you will see how this looks. So it does nothing yet. But basically you can force some incoming MIDI notes to fall on some other note. Like here, C sharp would become D, meaning let me just play C sharp, and let me do this. I'm still playing the same note, but it falls on D now. And there are some scales that are pre-done. So let me just get C minor harmonic, and now whenever I play my keyboard wherever, I'm getting notes that actually are correct for this scale, because it technically roots out the notes that don't belong in this scale. Also, a quick reminder is that you can always save your clip with these effects. So if I thought that I like this major chord sound, this could work in some spooky chase scene. So let me do this clip and just let's say that I just like the sound. So always remember that you can always save this as a clip. Let me just call it spooky. So I will save it to user library and clips. I'll call it spooky. And even if I delete this track now, let me create a new MIDI track. And if I bring spooky here, what do you know? It's there with the chord effect. And so everything will be remembered by clips. Clips are your friends. Saving clips is your friend. Okay, since we're talking about clips, let me show you about clip play modes and how you can play clips in different ways. I'll go to packs on the browser and core library. I'm loading this because I'm pretty sure you should have this on your hard drive too. But you can use any audio clip for this. Or you could use a MIDI clip too, but I'll just get some audio. Okay, this would do. Alright, so let me just, I'll do, create a new track once again. Vocal, and let me bring this here. Let me play this. Let's listen to the clip in context. This will work perfectly. Maybe Let me transpose it. I'll switch to warp mode to complex pro because I think this works better with vocals if you're going to warp the clip like I did, and if you're going to pitch it up and down. So let's talk about play modes. Let's see here. Launch mode. By default, launch mode is always trigger, which means that when you trigger the clip from its play button, it will play forever if it's been looped and no other parameters have been set. I will tell you soon how you can actually program the clip to play a certain length and then do some actions, but that'll come a bit later. But now let's see about the other modes, because trigger is the one that we've been using so far. We haven't touched this. This is always the default. Well, let's see about gate. And by the way, just to remind you, if you ever need information about pretty much anything, shift and question mark will give you the info view here. So if you place a cursor on whatever, you will get info here. So let's see about gate play mode. Gate will play the clip as long as you hold your mouse down, or a pad if you're using a pad. And this also has to do with the quantization. You remember how we talked about the global quantization here. So you see that clip has a quantization menu which now says global. So this clip will follow the global quantization here. I could also give this clip its own quantization. Let me set this clip to none. And let me use the gate mode. This will now mean that this clip will only play as long as I hold the play button down. Let's see. Let me stop the clip. Let me start the song and I'll play the clip. What I'll do is I'll hold it down and then I'll let go. So as long as I hold it down, it'll play. When I let it go, it'll stop. So that is gate, and it does follow quantization. If I had this set to global and I had one bar here, it means that when I let go, it will finish the one bar. Like I explained global quantization before, it will always wait till this amount of bars or beats will finish till the action happens. But I can have the clip not care about the global quantization. Let's see about toggle. Now toggle is like one click will play it and a second click will stop it. The previous mode was like it'll play as long as I hold it down, and as I let go it'll stop. But toggle is like one click to play, another click to stop. Just like that. And the next one, the last one, is repeat, which means that when I hold it down with my mouse or any pad that I might be using, it will repeat the playback based on quantization, which could be global, or I could give this clip its own quantization. If I want to repeat it real quick, I could go for like 1/16. So now let me just play it and I'll hold it down and you will hear that it will repeat. Change this to something slower if I wanted to. So that is the repeat mode. Let's check out one feature here, which is legato. Let me once again, I'll create a new track and let me do a search on user library for, I'm thinking of a drum loop. Funk-112 is in packs, chord library pack. Great. So let me, once again, I'll solo the track and I'll bring the drum loop here. Warping is on, it's probably okay. Okay, that's cool. Let me loop the first two bars. And I want to explain the legato mode. Let me first duplicate this clip. So I'll create another clip with minor variation. I will transpose this clip up. It's in repitch mode, which will not allow me to pitch it again. So let me actually set both these to beats mode. Okay, now I can pitch them. By the way, you can always double click on a value to return it to its default value. So there we go. So the other variation, let me call it +2 or actually, let me go for +7 so you will hear. I will pitch it up by 7 semitones. So now, as you can hear, every time I trigger a clip, it will always play it from the beginning. That is not always what you want. A legato will mean that as long as you have consecutive clips, like they are in the same group and there's no space between them like this. As long as you activate legato, it'll always continue playback. Let me I could create a third one just for fun. Maybe do it -5. And now let me select all the clips by dragging, or I could click and shift click here, and now I have 3 clips selected. I will activate legato and let me then play these clips. I'll play these in a row. So this is handy because the playback will not always start from the beginning. It will continue where it should be. So it's nice to create variations of a longer clip, and the playback will be where it should be, but then the variations will happen. So legato is definitely a useful feature in this. And one more thing to look at here is follow action. Now this means that it will tell the clip to play it pretty much as long as you want it to play, and then do another action. You have the actions in the drop down menu here. So for example, I could have the clip play for maybe like 1 beat and then move to the next clip. So if I do this, let me select all these 3 clips and then go back here and let me set this to 1. This is 1 beat, so it's 1 beat out of a bar, and play, and then after playing this measure here, then play the next clip. So I gave this parameter to all these 3 clips here, so now each clip will play for 1 beat and then move on to the next one. And because I have legato selected for all of them, it means that it will not trigger the playback from the beginning. So let's listen. Just for fun, I could let me do a reverse clip here, and let me reverse playback. I do this sometimes just to mess with things. That is also included in the playback now. If I wanted to randomize the playback, that is totally doable, because now it follows the certain pattern and nothing wrong with that. But if you want to do some crazy stuff, you can totally randomize the playback. And let's quickly go through the actions here. Stop, well, it will stop after this measure. Play again would play the same clip again, so there would be no movement between a clip group. Well, previous plays a previous clip, next we'll play the next one. This is what I did. First would mean it, after whatever clip has this parameter, it would play the first clip of the group, so it would return to the first one. And the last will play the last clip of the group, but you can do randomizing actions by any or other. So what's the difference? Any will play any clip in the group, including the clip that just played, so it might repeat itself. Other means that whatever clip will play will be not the same clip that just played. So this eliminates the chance of actually repeating the same clip. So play any other clip, but don't play the same clip again. So other. No repeating the same clip. If you want to make this really quick and crazy, you can. I'll make the time parameter really short, so check this out. So definitely have some fun with this and think of all the creative possibilities you can do with this. Later in this video, I will show you how to do automations. So when you use automation with effects and this feature, you can come up with some pretty crazy stuff. Now let's get our hands dirty once again. I want to proceed towards making music, but there's some tools that I still want to teach and show you before we get into the music. So far we haven't got really deep with making beats. We've been playing some synthesizer sounds and some samples, but let's play some drums and create our own drum kit. And there's a very convenient way in Ableton Live to do it. I'm going to create a new track. There's one instrument that's really fast and quick to use with drums, and it is Impulse. I encourage you to mess with this if your drum needs are pretty simple. You can basically just drag sounds in here and just get cracking. You have a few basic parameters here that are pretty useful and a lot of fun. Like this. But I want you to learn the power of the drum rack. And I will load on my new MIDI track a drum rack. So I can drop it in or just drop it here. So what is drum rack? Well, let's take a look. You have notes here and they're pads. If you have ever seen a drum machine with pads, this is what drum rack is about. You have empty pads and you can drop sounds on these pads. Of course, the sounds can be any sounds. So you can do any sort of crazy finger drumming performance instruments with this. But I'm going to mess with drum sounds. So you can just find and look and bring any drum sounds from your library into the instrument. Like when you go to drums on browser and click on it, you will see all your possible instrument drum presets and full drum kits and individual drum sounds. I have a lot of sounds here because, well, there's lots of sounds on my hard drive, but you can use any sounds that you may have on your library. Just click on drums and see. But I will bring a few sounds in. Let's go from there. That'll do. I'll bring it to the pad. Okay, that's great. And what else? I'm gonna need a hi-hat. So hi-hat, by the way, I will be explaining on my advanced video how to add these drum categories because it takes a little messing, but it's doable. And what else? I have a kick and hi-hat. I will need a snare too. So that's good work. So let me see how I can play this. I have armed the track here and keyboard is armed. So let's do it. Okay, so you may have this problem. Look here when you're playing. Like I'm now tapping my computer keyboard, but I'm not getting any sound. And the reason for that is that you're getting some visual feedback here. My notes are playing too high. My notes are playing C3. So as we can remember, if you want to use your computer keyboard, you can set the octave that your computer keyboard currently covers. So I'm going to hit Z a couple times and I'll see down here C1 to D2. And hey, that works because as you can see, I put my drum sounds on these notes starting from C1. So it's all chromatic and they go up from C1. So what is so nice about drum rack? First of all, I can open this view here. This is my drum rack track. And by clicking on this arrow, you see I will now play the sounds. First of all, you will get a very handy mixer for drum rack. And let's say I want to put a reverb on just the snare. Audio effects, reverb, and there it is. I'll drop it on the snare track. So that is pretty handy. So you can do processing per sound. You can of course also, if I wanted to have a reverb on the whole drum track, I could, for example, drag this reverb from the snare track to the drum rack track, which means that now all these drum rack elements are going through the effect that is on the main track. Okay, so that's handy. You can also give colors to these tracks if you want to use some sort of color coding for your drum sounds. That works. Okay, so let's do something really basic. I'll just do a really quick basic drum loop. What I like about drum rack is now, as I'm looking at the clip view here, I can see the names of the pads. So if I wanted to, this is my kick pad. If I wanted to call this kick, I can do that, and now you see it says kick here. So it's good to give some names that are kind of easy to read. HH could be for hi-hat. So it's nice to see them here. And this is why I love using this instrument, because when I draw in MIDI notes, I will see what instrument this is for. So hi-hat, kick, and so on. So I'll just do something super basic. Let's just nudge these guys a little bit. Take velocity down, hold down Command or Control, and just click and drag. Okay, so the hi-hat is too loud, so it's very easy to take its level down. If I wanted to swap the snare, for example, it's very easy. As you click on a pad, you will see the instrument change here, and it'll reflect the last pad you've clicked. So if I wanted to change the snare, I just go to drums and just look for a new snare. For example, this. And we talked about using simpler before. A nice feature about drum rack is that you can have some sounds that cannot play at the same time. So some sounds can cut each other off. What do I mean by this? Let me get a crash symbol. Okay, let me do a crash here first. Let me just program this in. If I wanted the hi-hat to cut out the cymbal so that whenever hi-hat plays, the cymbal cannot play, it's very easy. I'll double click on the track to see the drum rack, and you see the chain. I'll just click on this symbol right here, and this will show me choke. This means that if you assign samples to the same choke group, they will cut each other out. So I had the cymbal, let me put it to group 1, and hi-hat to group 1. So now let me mute the hi-hat. So you will hear that once the hi-hat plays, it will cut the cymbal sound. So that is handy if you want to have some sounds that do not really work at the same time. Like I know some people use drum rack for finger drumming instruments, and they may have different bass sounds on different pads. And as you know, if you play some bass sounds at the same time, that can be a disaster. So just put those bass sounds into the same choke group and no problem. It's good to be aware that you can use any instrument on the pads of drum rack. For example, if I wanted to put a bass instrument on a pad, I can. For example, let me look for... Okay, that could work, or... Okay, this is better. So I can just drag this instrument on the pad. By the way, this is a bass preset of the analog synth of Ableton Live. So I put it on this pad, and it's playing a little high. So you can see when I preview the sound here, it's lower, and here it's higher. So I can set it here, what note it will play. Now it's going C3, so it's kind of high. So let me tune it down to C1. Okay, so that is good. So you're not limited to using just simpler here. You can actually decide what instrument to use on the pad when you drag a sample to it. Basically, your relevant options are simpler or sampler, and where that is set is user library, defaults, dropping samples on drum rack. Now you see that I have nothing in this folder. That means that now when I drop any sample on a pad, the behavior will be the factory default, which is loading a sample on a simpler. But if I wanted to load a sample inside of a sampler when I drop a sample on a pad, what I would do is I would have to drag an instance of sampler in this folder, user library, defaults, dropping samples on drum rack. So how do I do that? Well, I only had to load a sampler first. Let me load a sampler on this track. And now I would go to user library, defaults, dropping samples on drum rack, and I would just drag this instance of sampler here. Okay, now it's saved. So now let me bring a drum sample on a pad, and you will see, let me get this symbol. Okay, so I will drop it on the pad, and hey, what do you know? It opens up in sampler. So this way you can decide which sampler instrument you use when you drop a sample on a pad. There's also a quick way to convert the simpler into a sampler by getting this option from the menu. So that way you can convert simpler to sampler in place. I will not go deep with the differences of simpler and sampler in this video. That will be in my advanced video. But one thought about why sampler can be a little nicer than simpler sometimes. Let me convert my kick to sampler, and I will show you that you can actually layer sounds with sampler while it's not possible with simpler. So this, I'm looking at the sampler that's playing my kick drum. So if I wanted to, let's say that I wanted to layer my kick drum with a hi-hat, it's completely doable. So how would I do that? In sampler you have this zone tab which will pop up a view like this. So here you can stack sounds. For example, let me just get any hi-hat. Let's say that I find a hi-hat that I like. So now I'll just bring it here, and now my kick is layered with the hi-hat. And this is something you cannot do with simpler, but just a thought about using sampler when you want to layer, for example, drum sounds. Let me show you how you can use effects inside the drum rack. So I'm looking at my drum rack. Let me close the zone tab of sampler. So see these icons here. So click on the R and you will see this. It says drop audio effects here. So this is a space for audio effects that you may want to use inside your drum rack. Now let's just get a reverb. Let's drag it here. So now I have reverb inside my drum rack, and right now it's not doing anything yet. Let me click on this S. So now I'm seeing sends. Let's say that I want to send some of my snare drum to the reverb. I can. I will raise the level of send A for my snare drum. So now I'm only sending the signal of the snare to the reverb. This is pretty similar to what we did with these return tracks. It's just that here the effects are inside the drum rack, and you can use any effects here if you want to. Also, if I want to route some of the drum rack pads to the return tracks, that is very doable. Let me just delete reverb and let me right click, create return chain. Now this chain is not doing anything yet. Here you see it says audio to rack output. It means that now when I send any of these drum rack pads with the send control to this chain, the output of this chain will be rack output. But let's say that I want to direct this chain to my return reverb. It's very doable. I just set this to a reverb, and now when I send my snare drum to this chain, it will go to a reverb. Just like that. So you can use effects inside the drum rack and use any effects here, or you can route the pads to return tracks if you wish. A really quick pro tip about taking out some of the drum rack elements to tracks of their own. What do I mean by this? Well, in my drum rack I have a few sounds. If I want to, I can create a new track, for example, for the kick track by dragging it out. I click and drag here, and now kick left the drum rack. It's not here anymore, and it's now on its own track over here. Let me undo this. So if I want to keep it inside the drum rack but still create a new track for it, what I always do is I drag and I hold, on Mac I hold Alt, and it'll create a copy. So now let's see, solo. This is my kick now, and it was not removed from drum rack. So you can take it out completely out of drum rack if you want, but you don't have to. You can create a new track and still keep the original inside the drum rack. And what do I use this for? For example, if I want to export just a kick and manipulate it, for example in a live set, it's pretty handy having it on its own track. So good to know if you need this. The next great feature about Ableton Live that I want to show you are the macros. These can be used with any instrument and any effect, even third-party effects. But let's start with the ones that we have in drum rack, as we were just using drum rack. Let me close the browser and info view shift question mark. So if you're not seeing these, this knob here is the one that will display the macros. So what are macros? These knobs can be controlling pretty much anything, with some exceptions. Let me close the chain view, and when I hit map, you will see that some things will be displayed on a green background, for example here. And here's a lot of stuff. This means that whatever is shown on a green background when you're in this map mode, these parameters can be controlled by these knobs. For example, let me see my snare drum. This sampler has a filter. I can enable the filter, and this default is low pass filter, which means that it's going to cut out some of the high sounds. So it sounds like this. So for example, I could control these parameters with these knobs. Why would I use these knobs? Well, sometimes it's not very fast or convenient to come here and dig up the parameters you want to control. So these macro knobs are great for controlling some important parameters in a very convenient way, because they are located as the very first thing on your track. If I want to map this knob to a macro, one way to do it is I'm going to right click on this and I'll see this menu. So I clicked on map to macro 3, which did this. Let me undo so you can see it again. So right click and map to any macro. I could go for 4. And now you can see when I'm turning this macro knob, this filter value here is changing. So basically anything that is inside this rack can be controlled. So what else do I want to control? Maybe the pitch of the hi-hat. Controlling the pitch of the hi-hat is here, transpose. Another way to map this to macro knob is hit map mode And first click on this value because I want to map this. So first click on this, and then the word map will be seen with a dark font. So click on map, and now the transposing of the pitch is controlled by this knob. So whatever you want to do, this is up to you. And one thought about this, let me open the browser and enter map mode. Here you can actually see the minimum and maximum values covered by the macro knob. So for example, if I wanted to restrict the range of the hi-hat pitch, I could do that, because now it goes very low and very high, and it sounds kind of maybe a little not so useful. So on this field right here, I could restrict the movement or the values that the macro knob will cover. So maybe this could be more useful, maybe. And what's useful, that's up to you. And maybe the filter frequency could also be somehow useful, because now it controls the snare filter. The top is you cannot even hear it because it's controlling frequencies that are super high. So I could set this to something sort of useful and audible, because now it goes really low if you listen to it. So I cannot even hear it. So pro tip, I first crank it all the way counterclockwise, and then I'll set the minimum till I start to hear it. So maybe in a song context that would make more sense. So definitely set the values so that they actually serve your purpose and are useful. So now that you know what macros do and how you use them, let's expand using macros with pretty much everything. Let me concentrate on my drum track here. I had a reverb after it. Well, what else could I add? I could, for example, let me add a redux. This is a sample rate and bit depth reducer. Let's listen. One more. I could get the ping pong delay. So now I have 3 effects. And if I wanted to control these with a macro knob, like we just did with drum rack macro controls, I could group all of this. So I click here, I hold shift, I click here, and group. So now you see that they got placed inside a rack, and rack has these knobs. One nice thing about this rack is, let me activate all the effects. You can quickly turn everything off. I do this sometimes when I want to hear the unprocessed version of the sound and then the fully processed. So it's very easy to turn everything off. But the great thing about this rack is these macro knobs. So these are exactly like the knobs we saw in drum rack. So now I could map some parameters of things that are inside of this rack to these macros. So I hit map mode here, and once again everything that is green can be mapped. So maybe the dry wet of delay could be mapped here, and downsample parameter of this redux goes here, and reverb dry and wet could go here, and maybe reverb decay time. So and once again, you will see the start and end values of the knobs here in the browser once you go to map mode. So some of these may get a little crazy. So make sure to set these values so that they are somehow useful and don't get too crazy. And this can be done with anything, even third-party stuff. Let me show you. Let me just really quickly create a new MIDI track and let me load a popular synth, Serum. Now, I won't be doing any fancy stuff with it, but let me show you how to operate the parameters of the synth. Now, when I open up this synth, I don't see very many parameters here. The chances are that you may not see anything. It could be looking like this to you. And it is normal. And if I want to get some parameters here, so if I want to display some parameters so that I can control them with the macro knobs, I can. So I have to go and hit configure here. And then in this mode, I will touch the parameters that I want to see. So for example, filter here, like this. And what else? Maybe even detuning if I want to touch that. Basically anything, everything, it's up to you. So you can display those parameters with configure, and then I would once again hit group, and now I could map the filter to a knob, and this is a third-party instrument, and this is very doable. So now that's how you make it happen with third-party stuff. By the way, a really quick thought about computer keyboard mapping. Command K on Mac, and I think it's Control K on PC. When you hit that, you will see a lot of things on an orange background. This means that these things can be mapped to your computer keyboard. For example, track mutes, among many things. I click here, click 1 on keyboard, here 2. So it means that now when I click on those keys on my computer keyboard, they will mute these tracks. And you can map this to many things. For example, on my master, you could have maybe like an analyzer. Let's add spectrum here. So I could, for example, map the focus of the plugin into a key. So on this mapping mode, I click on the top bar, and let's say I click Shift S. It means that the focus is now mapped on this spectrum, which means that wherever I am, and when I click Shift S when I'm not in computer keyboard mode, now when I click Shift S, the focus will be brought to this plugin, which is really useful when you want to see your analyzer real quick. This is what I have on my master. What I do a lot is I use this utility plugin on my master, which allows me to make the signal mono by setting the width to 0. So I usually have it off, but I have it the power button mapped to, well, you could have it mapped to whatever key you like, but just map it to a key, and when you play your song you hit the key, and you will hear your song mixed to mono immediately. So definitely experiment with computer keyboard mapping, because it's very useful and you can map your keys to many useful things. Also, if you happen to have an external controller like pads or something with faders or knobs, those can be mapped in MIDI map mode. On Mac it's Command M, and it looks like this. In a nutshell, everything that looks blue here can be mapped. So first, if I wanted to map this knob to the physical knob, I first click on this knob on Ableton Live, and then I turn the knob on my controller, and that will be mapped. So computer keyboard mapping, general MIDI mapping. Definitely make use of these tools. Now I want to show you how you can actually capture all this action that you do with macros and just messing with parameters. And it's very, very easy to save everything that you do into clips. For example, I will once again take a look at my drum rack here. And if I wanted to do a filter sweep so that it would get stored into the clip, I can. The two things that I need for this is this track is armed for playback, Midi playback, and this icon here is what you need for recording into clips in session view. Session view is this view. We will be talking about the arrangement view later. So now those two things are in place, and I can just trigger the clip and I'll turn the filter, and here we go. What else? I could, for example, I could turn my audio effect rack on and off. Let's do that. So once again, this icon, and play the clip and mess with it. Okay, let's see. Let me double click on the clip. I will see this view, and I'm not seeing anything. I don't see the automation yet. How do I see it? This icon here. So click on it and the view changes. I'm now seeing this automation for my audio effect rack on and off, which was this here. This little red symbol tells you that, hey, there is automation saved for this thing. Just like you see, I did the filter sweep and I saved it, or I saved the automation. This little symbol here tells me that, okay, there is automation for this. So I double click on the clip, and this symbol here will show you the automation envelope. So this is for the audio effect track on and off. As you can see, if I wanted to see the filter sweep, I could, for example, get it from this menu here. This red symbol here is very helpful because every time you see this in the drop-down menu, you know that, hey, here's something. Here's automation. The list could be very long, but hey, I'll click here, drum rack, and automatically I'm seeing the filter frequency. As you can see, there's many things here, but the red dot is your friend in locating automation. So filter sweep is here. If I wanted to disable this audio effect rack on and off, I could just right click or option click and clear envelope. It's gone. Now let me concentrate on the filter sweep. I could draw here, for example, if I wanted to. B is for, it activates the pencil tool, and pencil has to do with the grid. We talked about grid resolution that you can set. On Mac it's command 1 and 2. So if I was drawing here, it looks like this. Some of my sounds are not actually going through the filter that I programmed. Let's not mind that. Let me just clear this envelope, and I'll just show you how easy it is to access any parameters of any plugin that you put on the track, and you can just draw things in. For example, let me just get an auto filter for this track. Now it's not doing anything yet, but once I'm in the clip view and once I am in the automation envelope view, I will always see the parameter that I've clicked on last, which means that if I want to draw an automation curve for this envelope or this filter, I will click on this. And now when I go and see this thing, this now shows the filter. So it's very easy. Just click on any parameter, then go see the clip in this envelope view, and it will show you the parameter that you clicked on last. And it's also good to understand that this automation recording pretty much has to do with everything. For example, even the track fader. Let me play this. As you can see, here it is. Even the sends. So everything can get recorded. Let me undo those. Right. One thing I want to show you is that the automation can be as long as your clip, or it could be longer or shorter. Let me go back and locate my filter automation, and here it is. As you can see, my clip is 1 bar long, and so is my automation envelope. This button here means that when it says linked, it means that the length of the automation envelope is linked to the length of the actual clip. If I hit this right here, I can now give the automation envelope a length of its own. So remember, my clip is 1 bar long, but I could have an automation envelope that's 4 bars here. So basically now the clip will be repeating the 1 bar content, but this filter envelope would be 4 bars. So unlink the length of the automation envelope if you want. There's one thing relating to automation that I want to talk about, and it's modulation. First, I will want to do automation for panning. So I have clicked on panning and I go to envelope view. So I can now do something for the panning. So I will do a simple automation that turns the panning to hard right and comes back. So there's nothing surprising here. It works exactly as it should. This is an absolute value, meaning when I draw a curve that takes the value to hard right, it goes exactly hard right because that's what I'm asking it to do. I'll enter modulation view. I'll draw an envelope that's hard left. So now look at this knob here. Without modulation, it was like this. So it starts from the center and pans it hard right. I'll redo and to get my modulation back. So modulation is relative to the current state. So it's almost like a math. It adds or subtracts from the current value. In 10.1, automation and modulation can be switched from these buttons. But if you're using a version that's before 10.1, you just gotta right click and you will get a selection that will show you modulation. Now let me show you a really cool trick with effects and multiple clips. Let me do 4 duplicates of this clip. Command D or duplicate. So now I have 4 identical clips. Let me just delete the filter. And what I want to do is I want to have 3 effects, and each clip will trigger the effect and also not start the clip from the beginning. So let me think of the effects real quick. I could have good old classic reverb. Okay, that'll do. And then maybe we'll amp. Okay, that'll do. And one more. Just Redux will do. Great. So I will name these clips in a relevant fashion. This clip will be dry, means it will not trigger any effects, and this will be reverb. This will trigger the reverb, and this will be amp, was the distortion that I'm using, and this will be Redux. Remember, when you click or twist an automation and then you go see the envelope view, you will see the thing you last click. So because I want to do the automation for the reverb on and off for the reverb clip, I will click on reverb on and off, and here I'm seeing reverb on and off. So for this clip, reverb on. So if you look at how this works, first clip is dry. When I click on this one, when I trigger this clip, it will play the reverb. Okay, let me do the rest. So for second one, amp on and off. So click, amp on and off automation is here. So draw this on the amp clip, and Redux automation. Click on Redux on and off, click on Redux clip, draw the automation on and off. So how these work now, let's listen real quick. Okay, so there is a feature that will actually continue the playback of the clip instead of starting from the beginning when you trigger a next clip or another clip in the group. So I will enable that. I will select all the clips, and a handy way to see the clip view, shift tab. So now all my clips are selected, and I will enable this legato. Now this means that when I play another clip in the group, the playback will not start from the beginning. Let me go for no global quantization, which means that when I click on a clip, it will play it immediately. So listen to what happens. So this can be a very handy way to do a little variation with your effects, but your clip will still play wherever it should play. And one more trick relating to this, earlier we took a look at follow actions. So if I select all the clips like I did, and then I'm giving it a follow action command, let me make this really short. So play for 2/16, and then play other clip in the group. Watch what happens. So now the clip will play where it should be, but the effects will be changing continuously. So definitely a nice trick for some pretty crazy stuff if you want to use it like this. One of the last important tools that I want to teach you is how to slice audio to Midi. Earlier we took a look at how you could convert Midi to audio by freezing, but I want to be able to convert audio to Midi in such a way that I can actually play it in small parts. On my project I have this track with the Amen drum loop. This is the one. Let me just pull the sense down. So I have the dry Amen loop. And I want to slice this to drum rack to Midi so that I can actually reprogram this drum loop. In my music, this has always been very important to me. So it is fairly simple. The command that triggers the action is slice to new Midi track. Let me click on this and let's see what it says. Okay, so create one slice per warp marker, or transient marker, or bar. This means that each of these will create a new pad on drum rack and will contain a slice of the audio. I usually go for transient because transients are these gray little symbols here. Ableton Live is pretty good at detecting rapid changes in the audio level, such as drum sounds. And I'm looking at this and I see that pretty much every drum sound seems to have this gray transient marker. So I could chop by those markers. Another option would be warp marker, which means that whenever I create this yellow marker by double clicking, I could get pretty precise, and I could now mark the spots like I want to chop it here, 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 and so on. But I think the transient markers will be good for me. So let me go slice the new MIDI track, and transient is what I want to go for. Slicing preset has to do with some of the resulting macro knobs features. I'm going to go for built-in now, and let me hit OK, and let's see what I get. Okay, so this track here is what I got. And it's all nicely on time. Let me check it with metronome. So it works. The reason that it's actually nicely on time on the grid is that when I did the slicing, I had this set to on. So preserve warp timing. It refers to warping. And so when you have warped something so that it's nicely on time with your project, that's a handy feature, because now here I have the basic drum loop. And I could now go and reprogram this a little bit if I wanted to. So let's do just that. You can remember, you can always duplicate a clip. So whoops. So I'll just create a duplicate a clip. Let me call this aim in edit, and I'll mess with this clip. I'll just delete everything. I like to do stuff by myself, so let's listen. I think some of my drum sounds cut a little short, like if you listen to these here. So earlier I talked about simpler and sampler, so let me locate the drum sounds that get a little short and let me loop them. They are slices 19 and 20, for example, so I'll locate those guys, and okay, let me find those with my keyboard. Okay, so here, for example, this one. You see that the loop of this simpler has been mapped to the macros. We talked about macros earlier, so if I'm using this built-in chopping feature, which refers to when you did the slice new MIDI track, you have to use a slicing preset, and I used the built-in one, which results in these features on macro knobs. So I could, for example, use the loop length, which makes the loop longer. Let me listen to the part real quick. Okay, it's not choppier anymore. It sounds better. One thing that I could do also, what I do a lot, is sometimes I just convert it to sampler and use the alternating loop, which is this loop mode, and I would set it pretty much like this. So it sounds very good. In my advanced video, I will show you how you can create your own slicing preset, which means that after the chopping, you can predetermine what these knobs will do after you chop. So all of these will be determined by you. But for now, this works, and let me just do a loop real quick. I always keep this on when doing MIDI like this, because I just want to hear the drum sounds. Helps me to come up with the loop, because I usually hear the loop in my head and then I just program it. By the way, when you have selected a MIDI note like this on Mac, if you hold Alt and use your computer up and down arrow keys, you can go from a MIDI note to another. And I often duplicate Command D to get a new MIDI note. Shift up and down throws the MIDI note up and down an octave, which is 12 steps. My loop is 4 bars, and I could just set the loop to 2 bars. All right. A quick tip, if you ever run out of level like I did here, I'm raising the fader and I feel that it's not loud enough. I always use the utility plugin, which gives you a lot of gain if you need it. So here I would just raise this a little bit. Before getting busy with the music, let me show you some really nice features relating to converting audio to MIDI. I'll take a look at this drum loop here. There's these options here, converting the audio to MIDI. There's harmony, melody, and drums. So let's see, I will convert this MIDI audio clip to drums. Let's see what happens. Okay, so I got a new track here and it sounds like this. Let me play the original drum track and this new one together so you hear that it's pretty similar. So what it did, it analyzed the drum loop for kicks, hi-hats and snares, and it basically did the same rhythm here. It's got the same groove and swing. By the way, I will be talking about grooves in Ableton Live in my advanced video. Keep in mind that you can, of course, put your own drum sounds here. Like this is the beat that I got. You can always replace these sounds. For example, if I wanted to use a different kick, I would just go and find something that you like and just throw it in. Let me get a new snare. That could do it. Yeah. It's an easy way to sort of steal the rhythm and then redo the sounds and layer things if you want to. Another feature is harmony. No, let's go for melody first. I'll create a new audio track because I know that I have a bass line on my desktop. Right on, let's drag it in. This is the one. I'll warp it. Yeah, it's good enough. So now I will go for convert melody. Melody is monophonic, so there's no chords or anything. So let's see what I'll get. Original once more. This one. And the MIDI that I got. Okay, I have to fix it a little bit. I picked this because I know that it would be slightly challenging, because the double bass that I use has a bit of harmonics. It's not the easiest audio in the world, but this is fairly good. This would be like, let's compare. I'll play them at the same time. Let's loop this one. And once again, you could load some badass bass instrument on this track and keep the MIDI. So instruments, analog, bass, this would do perfectly. Let me try this. Oh yeah, man. So handy, just steal the information. And one last thing is, I know on my desktop I get a piano sample with some, it's got some nice chords. Alright, it's also slightly challenging because it's a little dusty. Let me warp it. Let me fix the warping. Remember that if your time or the timing is kind of like half or double, twice the speed, you can always use this. Let me use metronome and listen. Remember, if you have to fill the gap, double click to create a warp marker and just drag the stuff with shift, hold, drag, and often it helps. Like if you had to do this. Anyways. This could work better. By the way, you may hear some of the audio gets compromised a little bit. I usually use the Complex Pro. It sounds the best with harmonically rich material. Yeah. See, it's very smooth. But anyways, what I wanted to do with this is convert harmony to new MIDI track. Keep in mind, this is pretty complex material because you have chords and the audio is a little dusty, but let's see. Convert harmony, and here we go. Alright, so let's play them together. I think it's missing something. I'm not sure what, but it's pretty close. So it is pretty impressive. I did pick audio sources that are slightly challenging, but I can assure you, when you have something that's really clear, usually you just don't have to do anything necessarily. But sometimes you have to fix these little things, but definitely experiment. For example, just what I've done is I've gone on YouTube and I hear something like a nice chord. I take the chord, make an audio sample out of it, bring it to live, and then just get the harmony out of it. So then it'll be yours. And once again, you can replace this funny sounding instrument with whatever, just instruments, and let me see, maybe wavetable and pad. Maybe just get the wavetable as it is and mess with it. It's just going a little loud. Add a ton of reverb, of course. Sounds a bit like Twin Peaks almost. Okay, definitely do have fun with these three features. Convert audio source to MIDI.